my innate drive to know God. And anthropology shows us that every culture around the world has some type of religion. We as human beings were made with this incredible longing to know God. That evidence points us to the existence of God. So when I've got intellectual questions and doubts, I've got to study the evidence. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? When you study the empty tomb, when you study the eyewitnesses who saw Christ risen from the dead, when you study the change in the lives of the apostles who turned from Christ deniers, Christ deserters, into martyrs for Christ because they had seen him risen from the dead. When you study the women who saw Christ risen from the dead, when you study the emergence of the first century Christian church and how these Jews who worshipped on Sabbath began to worship on Sunday, the first day of the week, in celebration of the resurrection of Christ. When you study these Jews who held so strongly to the moral law as the way to heaven, as the way to God, being changed by the grace of Christ, the forgiveness that God offers through the cross of Christ, you begin to see the evidence is Jesus really did rise from the dead. But then also there are emotional doubts. You and I get hurt. You get burned by a Christian hypocrite. I get burned by a person who I thought loved Christ, but then they contradict their love for Christ by hurting me. You and I then struggle with emotional